In order to display a list of activities on activities page, we use v-for directive to iterate over activities array, which is currently located within the activities component. But since activities data is one of the main data in our application, it would be good to consolidate all main data in one place, to have only one source of truth where data can be modified and passed further to all components down the component tree, which may require that data. So in this lesson we're going to move definition of activities array directly to app component. And this way we're gonna gather all main data in the application in our root component. And this root component will be our source of truth. Let's get started and open the activities component in the editor. From here we're gonna extract this activities array and let's move it to app component and place it right after timeline items constant. And then in order to pass this activities array to the activities component, we're gonna use prop with the name activities and specify our constant name. And every time we pass new prop to the component, we always have to accept this prop. Let's use define props macro within the activities component and specify options for activities prop. This property will be required and its type will be array. Validation rules for this property we're gonna specify a bit later. And now let's also extract one more piece of data that is currently resides inside of activities item component, which is this period select options constant, which stores options for select box. And since this is a constant array which will never change, it doesn't make much sense to store it directly within this component. So let's take this whole array and move it inside of constants. We're gonna export new constant with the name period select options and paste our array. This way we try to gather all constant data inside of one place, which is this constants module. And in those components where this data will be needed, we're gonna import it explicitly. Let's write import statement for period select options constant from constants module like this. And since we have also renamed constant name, we need to specify correct name when we pass this constant array inside of options property of base select component. And now let's switch to working on validation. First of all, we're gonna write validation for activity property within activity item component. The validation logic for this property will be contained within isActivityValid function, which we will create soon. And for now, let's copy over import of another validation function from different file and place it inside of activity item component and use this import to import isActivityValid validation function. And now let's go ahead and declare this function inside of validators.js. We'll create new function with the name isActivityValid, which accepts one parameter, which is activity we're going to validate. Export this function and let's decide what validation rules should be applied to activity element. Initially, these rules will be simple because activity item is no more than just a simple string. And to check it, we're gonna use validator function isString to make sure it is really a string. And also this string should not be empty, so it should contain more than 0 characters. And since this line can be represented as an individual validation function, we can declare a new function with the name isNotEmptyString. Passing our activity name inside and declare this function right down here. Let's paste that expression inside and use proper parameter name in here, valia. And now to check if our validation works, we're gonna switch over to app component and inside of activities array, we're gonna add another entry at the end, which is supposed to make our validation fail. It will be an empty string. And since activity names should be non-empty strings, it should show validation error inside of browser console. So this activities array will be passed down to the activities component within activities prop. From there, every item from activities array is gonna go inside of activity item component within activity prop. And finally, validation logic for activity prop inside of activity item component should show a warning saying that custom validator check failed for prop activity. And indeed, we can see this warning in a console. And the last element of activities array does not show any name, since name in this case is empty. So our validation for activities array works perfectly. Let's revert changes we have done to activities array inside of app component and verify that after that there are no more warnings in a console. And finally, let's write validation logic for activities array inside of the activities component. We're gonna use a new function validate activities. Let's copy over import of validation function from another component, paste it inside of this component, rename the import, and in the validators.js file, we're gonna export another function validate activities, which will accept array of activities as its only parameter. And for this validation, we will stick to the same approach we have used to validate timeline items array. In here, we wrote separate function validate timeline items to validate the whole array of timeline items objects. And every object within this array we have checked by using another validation function, is timeline item valid. So in our current case, to validate array of activities, we're also going to iterate over this array by using every method. But in order to check individual elements from this array, we're gonna use another function, is activity valid. And this way it's gonna verify that all items within activities array are indeed valid activity names. And now let's do one final check in the browser. Firstly, we're gonna play around with select boxes to see if no warnings appear in the console. Everything looks good. And also let's try to navigate between pages to see if it will cause any errors or warnings. Looks like nothing was broken and all data that is passed as props to different components is indeed valid.